facility are able to use. So I thought it would be a great opportunity just for Lisa to come along and just tell us a bit about what is available there and what it's essentially doing. And you can see a lovely picture of it there.
I just check everyone at home. Can you see Lisa's presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Yes, thank you for inviting me to come to talk today. As Kim pointed out, we're a very new facility. We officially opened in March 2020, but we COVID opened sort of officially opened March 2022, sorry, but COVID opened in early 2020. So it's, yes, we still feel very new.
I think I managed to get one research patient in before.
Was it one of yours? Yeah, probably. Yes, and I don't think one of our scanners was fully operational until quite late in 2021. So yes, we're officially open as of this year. So we're very nearby. You can obviously the big building in the centre is the Rild, where we are today, and we are just there on the other side of the car park, so very close by. And what's great for us to be located so closely to the clinical research facility is that many of the studies that would want to use our facilities likely as not need support from the clinical research facility. So it makes it a better experience for participants that are coming in to be able to move so easily between the sites. And it's just another view of us, and you can see, yes, it's a very small car park. I think that's the windows of the CRF just in the background. So very close neighbours. So in terms of what we do, we're primarily an imaging facility. We house a combined PET CT scanner and an MRI scanner. We'll talk a little bit more about those in a second. We also have clinical space that we can use. We have exercise bikes and VO2 max, for looking at maximum oxygen use of muscles during exercise. Often the facilities like the exercise bike are used alongside something like an MRI scanner, but they can be used completely independently of those scanners. So we have a lot of space that we can use to support research. In terms of very briefly who we are, our core team is our director, Professor Mireille Politis. We have an imaging lead, Heather Wilson, our MRI lead, John Fulford. We have a clinical applications lead, Eduardo Di Natale, our facilities manager, Cameron Hurd, and myself as business manager. And but that's just the core team. We're also working very closely with colleagues from radiology and nuclear medicine at the Royal Devon Trust. We have a unique sort of cooperative model. We are a university facility. We're based on NHS land, and we have a cooperative operational model, which means that for the MRI in particular, 60% of our time, the MRI is supporting research studies, but a significant 40% of our time, the scanner is being used for NHS work. So for patients that might need an MRI scan at the trust. Our PET CT is currently solely research. During COVID restrictions, when we couldn't conduct any research at all, the CT aspect of that was used to support NHS work for as long as they needed it. But to move on to the imaging itself and the kinds of things we do, and I will apologise in advance if anybody's knowledge of medical physics is more sophisticated than mine's. One of our main scanners is our MRI and our magnetic resonance image, which is magnetic resonance imaging. And as you might expect from the title, it is very much all about the magnet. And it is a very strong magnet. And the way that it works is it sort of makes use of the body's natural magnetic field. So as you probably know, we're mostly water and fat, and comprise a lot of hydrogen and oxygen atoms within that water. At the core of all of those atoms, you have protons, which are very small but a sort of slightly magnetic particle, which act like tiny magnets and are very sensitive to external magnetic fields. So when you go inside, for anyone that's had an MRI scan before, when you go inside that very tight tube, you're inside the magnet itself, and when it's switched on, the magnetic field of the MRI pulls the protons in your cells into alignment with the magnetic field of the magnet. Once they're in alignment, the coil that you're in fires bursts of radio waves at you, and when that radio wave fires, it knocks the protons out of alignment. When the radio waves are switched off, they realign with the magnetic field. And that realignment with the radio waves coming on and off is the resonance part of the magnetic resonance, because when the particles are realigning, they let off radio signals, and it's those radio signals that are picked up by the detectors in the receivers in the MRI. And what those signals tell you is the exact location of protons in the body, and therefore allow you to distinguish between different tissues and different tissue types, because all the tissues, the protons realign in different ways depending on what type of tissue it is. So the way I tell myself that it works is it's much like a computer screen will use millions of pixels to create a complex image. The MRI will use millions of signals from the proton to create protons in the body to create a more complex image of the tissue type that you're trying to look at. And yeah, as you might imagine, the magnets that are inside an MRI are very strong indeed. I think these people on the left have probably found that out the hard way. If metal's brought inside an MRI suite, it will get very attached to the scanner very quickly. I think what happened in this bottom image is that a technician went into an MRI suite carrying an oxygen cylinder, and then apparently it took 4 hours to unstick them, and they were quite badly injured, I think, during that process. So there is a reason why access to MRI suites are very tightly controlled. In terms of the strength of the magnet itself, if anyone's had an NHS MRI scan, that's usually, I think they tend typically to be a 1.5 Tesla magnet, so Tesla being the unit of magnetic strength. What we have at the MGNC is a 3 Tesla magnet, so double strength magnet, which provides more resolution in the images, amongst other things. And for comparison, a typical fridge magnet, I was trying to find a magnetic comparison, a typical fridge magnet is 300 times weaker than the magnet we have in the MGNC's MRI, or 300, or we're 300 times stronger. But in comparison, a neutron star has a magnetic field of 1 billion Tesla, so it's all relative. But with magnets of the strength that we have in an MRI, it's probably no surprise that they can be very sensitive to the presence of any metals in unexpected places. So on the right here, this is an image of somebody that went in for an MRI scan with hair wax in place. It's so sensitive so that hair wax, and I learned this putting this together, can have iron oxide particles in it, and they disrupt the field, they disrupt the image or distort it around, give them this nice sort of Mohican look. But this can be seen in if people have unexpected metal in their clothing. That's often why you might have to strip down to scrubs with no wired underwear or anything like that. But you can also see distortion to images from eye makeup, nail varnish, maybe dentures. The metal can turn up in all sorts of places, even hair dye, apparently. So for this reason, it's why if you've ever had an MRI, the radiographers will have taken you through a very extensive MRI safety questionnaire to make sure that any metal that goes into the scanner is not going to cause any injury. The wax, yeah. I suspect, no, I don't think it's all dangerous. It's more it distorts the image, so I think it makes the image unusable for the people collecting it. So that person would either have to go back through with having washed their hair or something. And this is an example of the sort of image that you can create from MRI. In fact, this image was captured at the MGNC relatively recently as part of a study looking at Parkinson's disease. And as you can see, it gives, you can get quite high levels of detail on anatomical structures when you're capturing these images through MRI. So moving on to our other scanner. So I mentioned before, it's a combined PET CT scanner, but I'll deal with the two bits separately. Although the PET CT and the MRI look very similar, or they certainly look similar to me from the outside, their mode of operation, the type of images that they can capture are very different. So while the MRI will generate its image through its magnet, a PET scanner generates image through the detection of radiation given off by the participant in the scanner, who will have been injected by a substance called a radio tracer. So they'll be injected by the radio tracer prior to going into the scan. The PET detects that radiation and turns it into an image. And how this works in practice is that the radio tracer will comprise of radioactive atoms. In the case of the image here, it's carbon 11, and that radioactive carbon 11 will emit radiation as it decays in the form of positrons. The emitted positron will, once it's in your tissue, it can only travel very short distances before it, maybe less than a millimeter, before it starts interacting with electrons. And when it interacts with an electron, it creates an annihilation, a positron electron annihilation, which generates two photons, and they go in almost exactly opposite directions. So it's almost exactly 180 degrees difference between the direction they go in. And they are emitted at very high energy. These positrons coming out as photons coming out at gamma ray levels of energy, which is much higher energy even than an X-ray, and therefore you have gamma ray detectors on either sides of the scanner, which will pick up that energy and can convert it into an image. But what that tells us in that image is the distribution of activity, or the distribution of radiation in the body. So by analysing where the tracer does or doesn't build up, it's possible to analyse how certain bodily functions are working. So one of the commonly used tracers in a lot of medical research is the snappily titled fluorodeoxyglucose, or FDG, which contains a radioisotope of fluoride. FDG is similar to naturally occurring glucose. So your body, when this tracer is injected into you, your body will react to it or use it in a similar way to how it uses glucose. And for that reason, a PET scan using the FDG tracer can be very useful for identifying cancerous cells in the body, because cancerous cells will use glucose at a much higher rate than non-cancerous cells, and that would therefore show up at very higher, they're like energy maps, so high energy brighter, lower energy darker. So it's a way of it's useful quite a lot in oncology diagnosis there. So in terms of, hopefully this will work, this is an example of a whole body PET. So unlike the MRI, which creates structural images primarily, a PET can provide functional images and show what the body's doing, or in a sort of almost in real time. And as you can see in this is a whole body PET image that's been taken with an FDG tracer. You can see there's some activity in the brain up at the top, but what they've done is they've labeled it to try and identify activity in the kidneys, which I think you can see these very not very bright areas on the left and right. But what this scan has shown is actually the presence of a large tumor in the liver, which was synthesizing lots of glucose, which is why it's showing up almost on this heat map as a very bright red. And what you might spot, people might have spotted at the bottom of that image, is another spot of pooling of tracer, and that's in the bladder. So once you have the tracer in your body is trying to break it down and excrete it. So you often see buildup of tracer in the bladder. And that's the reason why places like the MGNC and other imaging facilities will have a special toilet solely for the use of people who've been injected with the tracer, because all of your bodily fluids for some period of time after the scan will be radioactive. So your bodily waste has to be treated very carefully as per Environment Agency guidelines. So we have a very special hot toilet. I'm very happy. It's one of my favourite things at the centre, so I'm very happy to talk about it for anyone that's maybe have it, be interested in it. But so here's a scan. A PET scan that was taken recently or acquired recently at the MGNC. The tracer being used for this one is called fluorobetaben, which is another fluoride 18 tracer. This one is interesting because it targets amyloid protein buildup in the brain, and that makes it an important tool for studies or PET studies of Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and dementias, where amyloid buildup is an important component. So the ability to study this amyloid buildup in people living with these conditions has allowed PET scanning to open up some new frontiers in understanding neurodegenerative conditions, because previously, I guess before PET scanning became a research tool, it was only really possible to look at amyloid protein buildup in the brains of people who had died. So this really does open it up to look at disease progression in people currently living with these conditions. So what you might have noticed in the last slide is that the image was quite fuzzy. It was lacking a lot of sort of structural anatomical detail. And in practice, PET data is usually acquired alongside something like a structural MRI to basically aid in identifying regions of interest and really to sort of hone down on areas where tracer concentration is building up. And as you can see in the images here, by overlapping the PET and the MRI, and my colleagues assure me that it is nowhere near as easy as just overlapping the two images, it really does allow you to get much more specific data about what the tracer is doing in situ. And hopefully, oh yeah, this is hopefully big enough on this screen to see that there's actually quite a range of tracers that can be used and acquired, different types of images that you can acquire with different types of tracer. At the MGNC, we support primarily fluoride 18 tracer scans. That's purely for practical reasons. We can't generate the traces on site. You need a cyclotron, which is sort of like a mini particle accelerator, to be able to make these. So we have to use a tracer that's got the longest half-life available because we need to ship it into Exeter. So we look primarily here at fluoride 18, but even within that group of tracers, we do have quite a lot, but there's also carbon 11 tracers, which can do very different, bind to very different targets. And what this allows is to look at very different functional aspects of the brain, and you can associate specific tracers and targets with particular clinical symptoms that you might want to look for, and it allows us to link that pathology and clinical outcomes, which is invaluable for understanding disease progression. And last and by no means least, in terms of the scanning capabilities at the MGNC, we also have a CT or a computerized tomography scanner, which is housed inside the PET. There's two separate detector rings inside the PET CT, which allow them to perform different functions. So CT scanners also utilize radiation to generate images, but they use the slightly lower energy X-ray radiation rather than gamma ray radiation. And the CT images are made by rotating a thin X-ray beam around the body, the ring that the body is inside, and the scanner takes hundreds of these like X-ray slices, which it then stitches together in a computer to generate 3D images of the internal structures of the body. And some may have had CT scans in the past, and occasionally you may be either injected with or asked to drink a dye, a contrast dye. So this is to allow certain structures within the body to show up more clearly in the CT scans. So iodine can help with identifying the outline of blood vessels, whereas barium, which you might swallow, can help with the identification of the outline of the digestive system, which can be quite useful if you're trying to locate things down there. So CT X-rays are more powerful than a standard X-ray and can provide much higher resolution images of inside the body, but the fact that you can stitch them together in a 3D way is also makes it easier to see these anomalies. So CTs are good for bone, blood vessels and organs, but sort of slightly less good for some of the detail of soft tissue where you might use an MRI instead. And that's just an example of some images that have been generated with the CT. See, possibly with the brain scan, there's slightly less of the soft tissue resolution and detail in the image there. And hopefully this video, and apologies for the screen glare because we took this off a screen at the MGNC. As you can see, hopefully you can see the resolution and detail when you start stitching these slices here. There's hundreds and hundreds of these slices. They stitch together, they allow you to generate these 3D images where you can manipulate them and rotate them and see a lot more detail. Oh, sorry, that was too much wiggling around of the mouse. So that's it's manipulating it, it's moving it along the planes. So very briefly, in terms of research at the MGNC, our scanners are currently supporting a range of research studies, not just academic studies with our university colleagues, but also NHS studies led by clinicians at the Royal Devon and Exeter. The main focus of our PET scanning at present is neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and dementia, and this reflects the fact that a lot of the tracers that are available for research are have targets in the brain. We haven't said that, however, we are looking forward to welcoming a study that's starting with us early next year on long COVID using PET CT to explore progression and symptoms of long COVID. And we're also working with university colleagues on more exploratory research in collaboration with Siemens, who are the manufacturers of our scanners, to look at how we can use PET scanning to support people with metal joint replacements and how those replacements function in situ. We're also working with our D&E colleagues on how we can develop our PET scanning to support oncology research that they'd like to conduct. And our MRI has quite an established pipeline of studies coming through, covering quite a broad range of conditions, including another long COVID study, kidney disease study, and we have an expert here, multiple sclerosis, eating disorders, nutritional supplements, muscle strength, body image disorders, and scoliosis, and they're the current studies, but so we have more on the horizon. And just to finish, although it does say neuroimaging above the door, we as you see, we do have quite a broad portfolio and diverse, and we are keen to continue to expand access to the imaging facilities for a broader range of research studies. We're even starting to welcome in slightly older research participants than we would normally have. So we recently had colleagues from the archaeology department come down to conduct some CT scanning on a sample of skeletons from Rome and Gloucester, and they were interested to look at trauma in the skull and how some of these people may have died because I think they believed that they were from a military cemetery. And I don't know, so this was the individual that was in the video a couple of slides ago. I don't know if anyone noticed that there was a big chunk, a big groove in the skull, which you can possibly just see in the sort of top right hand corner, and a little bit less so on the image here on the left, but it's believed that this person most likely met a sticky end or blow to a head with a sword. So being able to manipulate these 3D, it also means that where material is fragile, if you can have a 3D rendering of it, it makes it much easier to do, and it's good for looking at internal structure as well. So yes, so thank you for listening today, and please do always welcome get in touch with us if they want to find out more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, lovely. So it's great facilities for us to have, like the sort of the MRI, and then to have PET. There's not many institutions that PET machines that use. Fantastic. We've got these. Nice to see all the different forms of studies that are coming through.
Because I know sometimes because we're called a neuroimaging centre, and that might be linked to our genesis, but So like studies like yours, which are kidney focused, but it's nice to have quite a broad range because actually these techniques can be applied.
Okay, is there any questions?
Yes, I meant to put a picture in, and I decided for brevity to not put it in. Mireille Gillings is the donor of some of the funding that was used to purchase the scanners and to build the centre. Her and her partner, Sir Dennis, so it's Lady Mireille and Sir Dennis Gillings, they run a foundation which donated quite a large amount of money for the purchase of the scanners and some of the building. So yes, so it's named after her. She came to visit in March, so yeah, I should have put a picture in to her namesake. Yes, my favourite things. So what happens is under, I guess where it comes out, the pipes into it, there is a big containment unit, and the containment unit has a timer on it such that it only disposes waste into the sewerage system at certain time periods. So the good thing is that the half-life of the traces is relatively short. So for fluoride 18, it's something like 2.5 to 3 hours. So it means that in a relatively small number of hours, your body, it will have broken down to be completely inert. So by having the toilet disposal on a timer, it means that the units will break down, be completely inert before they're put into the main sewerage system. I think so. With the fluoride 18, way that we use it, it will be generated at a cyclotron facility, maybe 5, 6 a.m. in the morning, released out of the site at sort of 8, 9-ish. It's got a 3 or 4 hour journey to get to us in Exeter. We do some tests on it to make sure it gets injected into the participant in a special lead line room that we have. And then they might need to sit for maybe 60 to 80 minutes to allow it to move around the body. And then they go into the scanner for maybe another 60 minutes. So actually, it's lost a lot of its radioactivity by the end of the scanning. So there's not too much longer that the participant may need to either stay inside the facility or be mindful of contact with others. I mean, in reality, the dosages are quite low. If you took a return flight to Australia, chances are you would probably get more radiation exposure than maybe a scan. But and a lot of the safety is to raise the dosage to the staff who might be doing this multiple times a day, multiple days a week. So although as a research participant, I think there's a limit to how many PET scans that you could very tightly control ethically. It shouldn't have any real risk factors. More likely to have an allergic reaction to a CT.
Also apply to nuclear medicine, because I have an isotope. I get cancer, it's still going mad about 12 hours later.
So yeah, they might. I don't know if they told you to. It's like minimize contact with family members and
no children in the car.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's lower activity for the PET scans, but they do still advise maybe to minimise.
Patients with
Good question. I believe it depends. I think it depends on the age of the filling at. Like maybe there's an older type of filling that's less suitable for MRI than a newer type, and I think they check it on the questionnaire.
That's my understanding as well.
Yes,
that
if you've
there
seen the
is-
MRI, that's the question.
there is a certain age of fillings there. That is a question that we ask.
But anybody over about 50 would have nipples.
But I think there's also real.
Look into this a little bit because when I was with my partner said if fillings help, and I was like, I don't think so. And we looked into it, and there's a 7.5 Tesla magnet MRI had been used for, and I think they found that someone went in that and with mercury fillings, and it didn't rip the filling out, but it caused a leak in the tooth. I think it damaged the tooth probably because of movement. So there was some leakage, and that was with a 7.5 Tesla magnets. So
we don't need to worry about that.
we don't have to worry about that. We don't have one of those. So
I'm conscious, sorry, it's time for tea. So if we start the next session at 3 o'clock, we're running a bit late. So there will be teas and coffees outside. Before I go,